My research on the history of waste management led me back to the 12th century, when English officials first expressed concerns about the accumulation of waste and the threat to rapidly urbanized cities. However, the events and actions that were properly documented in the history of waste management truly began in the 16th century. The majority of the analyzed historical data pertained to the English Empire and the United States. This video will focus only on the waste management history of the British Empire and the United Kingdom up until late 20th century. Actually, the UK and its historical empire have significant waste management history due to several factors. First, the population growth trend in Great Britain between the 16th and the 20th century showed continuous growth, and in some cases it was reaching double-digit percentage in percentage terms. The high population density, as we all know, was always accompanied with challenges related to waste disposal and street cleaning. The second, Great Britain was the most technologically advanced place on earth with one of the most complex industrial infrastructures in the European continent. In addition, agriculture was always one of the main pillars supporting the economic growth of Great Britain. Both industrial and agricultural activities, of course, produced significant amounts of wastes of different types and natures. Third, the British colonies served an important source of various raw materials and consumer goods, which flooded the kingdom and encouraged, of course, new consumer habits that were not always in favor of the environment. The fourth and last, the plague epidemic caused a panic and provoked transformation in waste management throughout the kingdom. It created the need to streamline and organize waste management activities, especially in sewage water management. The extensive research in all the accessible literature has helped me to create a story with what I would call time scale, showing the changes in waste management that took place between the 12th and the 20th century. In the next minutes, I will talk about the selected key events, and later on I will show you the full list. So here we go. As early as the 12th century, the UK began to face a problem of industrial waste accumulation arising from large copper smelters, crucibles, and fragments of bronze foundries built in several districts of London. Also, the textile industry became another source of industrial waste, as the production of textiles became most important sector between 1200 and 1275. The rapid urbanization caused by the migration to these industrial cities and clusters led to a consequent shortage of manure in the farms by the end of the 18th century, and extensive search for fertilizer led to the creation of the first known in history large-scale commercial composting enterprises that used organic material from green waste and manure as raw material. The London waste management strategy proposed by Corbin Morris in 1751 was the first organizational response to the increase of waste challenges, and this event marked the first in history integrated waste management policy. By the 1800s, businesses and government in the UK addressed waste from different perspectives. The private sector realized the value in waste, thus formed what was known as informal recycling and collection system. This change was driven by resource value of the household waste rather than any legislation or public health concern. Consequently, an active waste supply and value chain started to shape out, where the so-called street finders removed all saleable items from the waste bin. Now, during the 18th century, British scientists heavily pursued the theories of Hippocrates, especially his treatise Air, Water, and Places. Many doctors followed his recommendation and looked at the environment to explain morbidity and mortality. This trend marked the first birth date of environmental science as we know it today. Residual waste in the 1800s comprised largely cold ash from domestic fires. Ash was in demand for brick making, badly needed for rapidly expanding cities. The fine ashes were mixed with the bricks as part of the firing element, while the breeze or cinder was used as a fuel for the kilns. The remainder was burned, and its residues were used in road construction. So as you can see, in that time, nothing was wasted. Nothing was wasted, sorry. All the organic residues continued to be collected during the 18th century for use as soil conditioner to feed the growing urban masses. The ash markets peaked in 1820s when most parishes were paid for allocating the right to have their waste collected. This organizational economic ecosystem witnessed the birth of the first reverse vending system, where waste generators were able to generate revenue from their valuable recyclables. And by the end of 1800, London parish vestries also stepped into the game. The contractors back then were granted exclusive annual franchise for ash collection and street sweeping. The contractors also built dust yards and waste separation sites from where the separated material were also sold to various end users. This model founded what we know now as recycling centers or waste management complexes. During early 19th century, everything that was collected was effectively and efficiently recycled. This could truly be seen as the first large-scale zero waste system. The borough of Brighton, for example, managed to sell all its waste, which was mainly manure from horses and biological waste from human. It was accumulated in the streets and eventually by processes of natural decomposition became fertilizer for the surrounding field that was sold to local farmers at £20 paid to borough council, of course. The change in waste composition drove the next development in the dust yards. The wide use in the 1870s of materials like metals and paper, along with the increase of food consumption, forced the private sector to design and build modern mechanical biological treatment (MBT) plants, which was separating materials and producing what are now called refuse-derived fuels, RDF, and compost-like outputs, CLO. In the same time, an additional economic and organizational layer was formed, and it was called street buyers, which were individual entrepreneurs who bought any repairable items, old clothes, furniture, waste paper, bottles in the glass, metals, rags, hair and rabbit skins, dripping, grease, bones, and even tea leaves. These street buyers were very well connected with the end users of all reusable and recyclable items and managed to get good revenue on their commercial activities without being paid by the waste generator. But very soon, these individuals were forced out of the market as a huge variety of shops opened to buy and sell reusable goods and recyclable material. The most comprehensive were the so-called rag and bottle and marine store shops, which bought directly from the public, from the street buyers, and from the various finders. The Rowletts rag store in Lambeth was a good example of this new layer. The rise of paper industry pushed the demand for rags until it became a strategic raw material. This market change initiated the first ever known waste export business model, as the UK and USA fought over the international rag market because their local resources were insufficient to meet the growing industrial demand. They looked for rags all over the world in countries that did not have their own paper production or had little of it. It is good to mention, by the way, that most of the developed European countries banned the export of rags after World War II, in the first known recyclables export ban in the history of waste management. The UK government started to face a challenge related to the removal of those wastes that did not have demand for the buyers and were stacked in the streets. So, a Disease Prevention Act was issued between 1846 and 1860. And later on, in 1875, Public Health Act served the cradle of the modern waste collection system as we know it today. The challenges related to the growing amounts of residual waste that was not recycled forced to use a new technology to reduce the waste volumes, and the term destructors was used for this new technology. The destructors are called today incinerators. This technology was first built in Nottingham, ladies and gentlemen, in 1874, before World War I. Destructors became the disposal option of choice for most large southeast towns and most of London. And later on, several destructors were built even to generate electricity for sale, forming the first ever known waste-to-energy technology. The thermal treatment of residues back then came to an end with the Clean Air Act implementation in 1956. This act accelerated the move from burning wastes. The existing destructors back then couldn't safely handle the complexity of the waste composition and were proving to produce toxic fumes. There were still 13 small separation and incineration plants operating in Greater London, most of which were no longer having manual sorting stations due to the fact that manpower cost turned to be too expensive. And eventually, all of the old generation destructors and incinerators were closed by late 1970s, and landfills therefore became the dominant disposal option during the 20th century in UK, driven, of course, by cheaper cost of disposal to the waste generator and low volumes of separately collected recyclables. The 20th century was the time also when UK, in collaboration already with the European Union, was focusing on putting together comprehensive waste management legislative base from one side and supporting other processing options than waste to energy to find more effective and economical option that would handle the waste away from landfills. And MBT was introduced back then as the technology that integrated several processes like material recovery facility, RDF, and composting plant. This solution was supposed to reclaim all the recyclables from the waste stream, separate the food waste fraction, prepare the combustible material by reducing their size. Finally, it should dry both RDF and food waste prior to sending it to their final destination. The production of RDF back then seemed to be so promising that the Department of Energy back then embarked on a program to recover RDF from waste starting from the late 70s. Another significant development in the 70s was the transposition and implementation of the latest revision of the Waste Frame Directive. It was originally adopted in 1975 as Directive 75/442/EEC the focus of which was ensuring the safe disposal of waste. It was subject of a substantial development in Directive 91/156/EEC issued in 1991, where recovery, recycling, reuse of waste, reclamation, and the use of waste as source of energy were introduced. The UK regulations in the third and fourth quarter of the 20th century were in full integration with the European Union directives and part of its environmental and waste management policy.